जा बैठो
हाँ।
बैठो बैठो
दूसरा कारण है कि जब किसी दूसरी भाषा में हम हिंदी साहित्य के बारे में बात कर रहे हैं, एक तरह का मेथोडोलॉजिकल डिस्टेंस पैदा होता है। एक तरह का प्रणाली का फासला जो वैज्ञानिकता के लिए, वैज्ञानिक दृष्टिकोण को स्थापित करने के लिए काफ़ी ज़रूरी है, इसके काम में आता है, इसके काम का लायक है। क्या आपके पास ये है वो हमारे लेक्चर के लिए एक हैंडआउट है? हाँ है, नहीं है? हाँ, कई है कम से कम। अच्छा, okay, so the title of my speech is Female Voices and Gender Constructions in North Indian Sun Poetry. Actually, it is related in many ways to the lecture we just heard, because it is an effort to reconstruct ideas about society at the time of Kabir through close analysis, through close reading of his padas, mostly the padas. Now, Kabir the poet is notorious for his poignant longing for a formless divine being expressed through powerful and often paradoxical imagery. He is the paramount bhakti voice. And because of that, that public image as a visionary and a mystic has somewhat silenced that part of his poetic oeuvre where he takes a female alter ego as his medium of choice in order to articulate emotional states. He is not alone in making that choice, because the world of Bhakti is conspicuously full of men speaking, singing, and sometimes dancing as women, in spite of a pervasive mistrust of femininity in Hindu culture. Now, how is this femininity, the Bhakti version of it, the good femininity, that is imagined and constructed by men, how is it articulated? How and why it has been ascribed the cultural meaning it carries in this particular context? How does it relate to the rare and poorly preserved authentic female voices in it? And that has also been mentioned. The female sun poets are very little is known about them. There is this book from 1953 by Savitri Singh, and that's about it. She did some research at the Nagari Pracharini Sabha, and since 1953, literally nothing has been done in this sphere. So first, some words about this Kabir as a woman persona. Now, there is one popular Kabir Upadesh that says, Nari ki jhai pare, andha hota bhujan. So, the snake goes blind when a woman's shadow falls upon it, right? So, that's Kabir following a long and well-documented tradition of blaming women just for who they are, not even for what they do. Because women are, by definition, kamini, generators of karma, and hence quintessential destroyers of spiritual discipline and quintessential enemies of the sons. Yet, in spite of this terrible warning, among his compositions, we find this one, which is both popular and with a well-established manuscript pedigree, because with Kabir, it's very difficult to know what he exactly has written, right? There is the oral tradition, there are manuscripts, but they are usually compiled later, much after his death. But this one is very well represented, both in manuscripts and in popular culture. And it goes like this. So that's the first pada on your handout. Bala ao hamare grehre, tum bin dukhya dehre. So, hey lover, come to my house. Without you, the body is full of sorrow. Sabko kahe tumhari nari, moko ihe andehre. Everyone keeps saying me, I'm your woman. That is so unfair. Ek me kvesej na sove, tab lakke sa nehre. Until we sleep together on the same bed, how can love be complete? Ana na bhave, ninda na ave, grih bin, dhare na dheere. Food has no taste and sleep doesn't come. I can never keep still in the house or in the wild. Jo kamine kamiko, Jo kamine kam piare, John piase ko nirere. Just like the lustful following his lust, like the thirsty after water. Hekoi esa upgari, harisiu kahe sunaire. Ese hual kabir baehe, bin dekhe, jiu jaire. So is there a charitable helper out there who could tell Hari, who could explain to him that such is the state of Kabir? Without a vision of him, life is waning. Among the padas in this collection, and that is Winan Kalevart, Millennium Kabir collection, that attitude is far from exceptional. In many of those padas, Kabir speaks with the voice of a woman. Actually, that's what prompted this research. I was amazed by the sheer proportion in that most famous of the Psalm poets, where he speaks as a woman. So, in spite of the supposed lack of qualities of the Absolute, when it comes to voicing emotions, Kabir seems to slip very naturally into a female persona. Sometimes, in Krishna Gopi fashion, she turns to a Sakhi, as a confidant, as a witness to his or her wretchedness. In other parts, she is Hari's young bride being brought in a carriage to her husband's home. Still elsewhere, she speaks of the new household, of the relations with the in-laws. The in-laws are also conspicuously present in those padas. And other things, which constitute a female world, and the emotional and the symbolic value of these elements of that imagined femininity can be quite enigmatic. When speaking as a woman, Kabir brings in as props elements of a married woman's world, objects, family members, and intimate scenes, and sort of stages them to build a nuanced, a multi-layered emotional atmosphere. So this is just one example. Then you have the number 2 on your handouts that illustrates this. Meri aankhiyan jaan sujaan bhai, devar baram sasur sang taji ke, hari piu tahangai. Balapanne ke karam hamare, mete jani dai, baah pakri, hari kirpa kinhao, aap samit lai. पानी की बूंद चो जीनी पियन दरचो है, तासंगी अधिक रही, दास कबीर पल प्रेम न घटाए, दिन दिन प्रीति नई. So, The take is, my eyes turned out so clever. Meri Ankhiya, Jan Sujan Bai. Forgetting about the in-laws, brother-in-law and father-in-law, they stuck to my beloved Hari. All the karma amassed since childhood vanished the moment I recognized him. Hari seized my blessed hands and drew me to himself. He who built the human body out of a drop of water, that one I'm so in love with. Kabir says, never for an instant does my love ever wither. Each day it blooms anew. Now, I should add here perhaps that, so these translations are mine. I'm not happy with them. I'm never happy with my translations from Bhakti poetry. Of course, poetry doesn't pass, part of the meaning is always lost, but in this case, a lot of it is lost, a lot of the beauty is lost, so I apologize for this, but still, that's the best I can do, because we need to translate more of Hindi literature. So, in the beginning, actually, when I read this pad, I thought that Kabir here was speaking in the voice of an adulteress, because he says, my eyes are stuck to Hari, and I forgot about the in-laws. But actually, then I changed my mind. So, because there are many others, and it's definitely not an adulteress speaking, the reference to the in-laws here rather stands for the duties and the conventions of this world that a young married woman has to abide by. So what is at stake, the emotion that is developed here, is the tension. It also appears very often in Surdas. Appearances are kept, so there is this world of duties and obligations and people and things and work. So appearances are kept, but the inner world of the heroine is completely swept away by the overwhelming experience of love, and that love, of course, is at once mystic and mundane. And only her eyes betray her secret, because that is also a common image in Bhakti poetry. The eyes are out of control and mirror directly the state of the soul. A significant amount of padas bring in a newlywed bride as a narrator, and that is, I think, the next one on your handouts. It's a very famous one. Actually, it's the first pada in Kalevard's collection. Dulhani gavo mangal char, Hamadari aye Rama bhatar, ta narat kari, mema narat kari hon, panchatat bariyati. Rama deva mere pahune aaye hain, me jobani me mati. Sarir sarovar bedi kari hon, Brahma veda uchar, Ramadev sangi bhamvari lehun, Dani banbag barbag hamare. Surte tiso koti ga aaye, Muniyar koti uthiasi, Kahe kabir hama byahi chale, Purika ek avinasi. So, bride, strike an auspicious tune. Lord Ram has come to my house. I will give myself, body and soul to him. The 5 elements will be the wedding party. Lord Ram is present at my home. My young blood is vigorously boiling. My body is a lake. I will light a sacrificial fire on its shore, and Brahma will recite the mantras. While I and Ram together walk around it, how blessed can I be? 33 gods will attend the celebration with 84 saints. Kabir says, I'm getting married to an indestructible man. So that that poem, that song actually, shows a slightly different treatment of the meaning of femininity. So we still have a sort of first-person discourse of the bride-to-be, but there is a whole new symbolic level of meanings that appears, like the 5 elements and Brahman, this and that. So the audience is still invited to imbibe the emotion of the female narrator, but there is a second-degree reading that is made possible, through which the whole scene, the bride being taken away from her parents' house, can be decoded as a metaphor for the soul on the verge of experiencing mystic union with the divine. So my point here is that there is a kind of distance here that did not exist in the first Pada, the Balamao Pada. There is a sense of distance also in the experience of the audience, which should always be taken into account. There is a sort of cognitive element interfering with the purely emotional level. The audience has to do some interpretation, has to do some decoding, has to employ their brains and not just their emotions to understand the poem. Now, there is another example, the next one, in which being with the beloved in marriage is rejected as unattainable or unattained, while the ultimate experience of the sati is upheld as the true one, and the one that really leads to the eternal union. Mei sansur piu guhune ai, sai sangi sad nahi pugi, gayo joban supine kinai, panch jana mili mandap chayo, tini jana mili lagan ginayo, sakhi sakheli mangal gave, dukh sukh mate hal charhave, nana rage bhavari pheri, gati jori babe patitai. Puri suhag bhayo bin dula. Chaukerangi dhariyo sango bhai. Apno puruk mukh kabaho na dekhyo. Sati hot samji samjai. Kahe kabir mesal rachi marimo. Tirunle kale tur bajai. So, for the sake of my beloved, I moved to the house of my in-laws, but my desire to be with him was never fulfilled. My youth has withered like a dream. 5 men built the wedding canopy, 3 others calculated the auspicious moment. Against this decoding is to be done. Who are the 5 and who are the 3? My friends sang the wedding songs and rubbed turmeric on my forehead, for better or for worse. We did all sorts of circumambulations. My father tied me to my husband with a knot, but the whole ceremony went without a groom. Unsettled in the wedding square, I held my brother's hand. I never saw my man's face. When came the time to become a sati, then everything became clear. Kabir says, I will make my funeral pyre and I'll die on it. Then, to the sound of trumpets, I will cross over with my lover. Now, merging with the divine beloved through fire is an abundantly attested image throughout the history of Indian poetry. Whether it would be in the shape of the moth, irresistibly attracted by the flame of the lamp, or Mirabai appealing to her jogi to rub her ashes on his skin, Death by fire stands for the definitive annihilation of the ego, the falling of the ultimate barrier between the subject and the object, of the last obstacle to unbounded, eternal, absolute love. While the assuming of a female voice seems a necessity in order to speak without constraints about emotion, the last line containing Kabir's name signals the end of the masquerade and gives a soteriological clue on how the content should be interpreted. That is something interesting. The last line where Kabir's name appears, even in padas where he assumes a female persona, he just like seems to return to his masculinity, and that gender transformation is also reflected grammatically. In the last line, wherever grammatical gender is marked, all the forms are masculine, even though before that they are all feminine. In other words, there seem to be two different dimensions of the kind of femininity assumed and articulated by Kabir in this category of poems. One in which the author, following a popular poetic convention of his time, fully endorses the emotions of a female lover as an expression to his longing for the absolute. And then another one, a symbolic one, in which elements of a female narrator's world can be interpreted in the light of certain doctrines and worldviews of the sons. To put it differently, there is a persistent ambiguity here between Kabir speaking directly as a woman, empathizing with the emotions of a Virahini, or his use of femininity as an arsenal of images or symbols in order to express levels of reality, of a reality that is, by definition, impossible to express, ineffable. These two dimensions, however, are never clearly separated, and actually this fusion makes for much of the poetic impact and for the appeal of those songs. Indeed, the parts in this special collection should be arranged, could be arranged along a scale in which femininity could be assessed from real to symbolic. In Akat Kahani Prem Ki, Purushottam Agrawal calls Kabir's adoption of a female voice conspicuous yet paradoxical. He underlines the spontaneity with which Kabir takes a woman's garb every time emotions are at stake, and he asks himself if Kabir does that in search of a suitable expression of the angst of mystic love, or does the pain of it awakens automatically, spontaneously, a sort of feminine consciousness inside him. So, in other words, is the need for a female alter ego born out of the nature of the experience itself, or is it a poetic necessity, a need of the expression? And the question is very relevant since the world of Bhakti seems full of men involved in this kind of cross-gender rhetoric, without even seeming to notice any contradiction with the attitude expressed in the Upadesh towards females and femininity. This situation seems to be pervasive across the Saguna-Nirgun divide. Because in Krishna Bhakti, male devotees are in the practice, in the life of devotion, something that is observable today in temples. Male devotees are invited to cultivate a kind of sublimated femininity corresponding to their true nature in the metaphysical realm. Invitation to identify with female mythical characters is a distinct feature of devotional poetry and in practical devotion, and it's not uncommon to see in Braj temples during intense celebrations male devotees dancing like gopis, their face hidden behind the end of the sari. The instinctive adherence to a woman's persona as soon as emotions or a certain type of emotions are in focus is intriguing, especially regarding the unanimously low esteem in which women in general are held. Purushottam Agrawal observes that Kabir, who is so vocal about his disapproval of caste and religious discrimination, never goes in his social critique as far as to tackle gender inequality. Now, gender and emotions from a larger perspective. If we look at studies, my next paragraphs are about how could these observations fit into a broader scientific perspective that comes from the study of emotions. That's a very big field in psychology. So, is womanhood a good or a bad thing? If sublimated femininity is a necessary element of the path to salvation, access to it seems to be granted only to males. Actual belonging to the female gender is never viewed as a facilitator on the spiritual path, quite the opposite. The last 10 years have seen an increased number of studies in the nature and cultural anthropology of emotions. In the social sciences, interest towards emotion has arisen out of a dissatisfaction with the dominant cognitive view of humans as mechanical information processors. Recent research has brought forward the view that emotion can be construed as ideas as much as or more than psychobiological facts. Emotions are private feelings, but they can be socially articulated. They can be treated as aspects of cultural meaning. When private, supposedly irrational emotional experience is voiced in certain contexts, cultural meaning is imposed upon it, transforming it into an interface between personal and social worlds. Emotional judgments are seen to require social validation, thereby linking emotion with power and social structures. Therefore, emotion is both socially shaped and socially shaping. The study of the social construction of emotion can prove to be no less insightful in cultural anthropology than that of gender. And again, that reminds me of the Samajik Sandarbha, the social context in which bhakti exists, and that social, we should never lose track of it. Even when we delve into the most emotional and the most personal, the most spiritual, the most mystical aspect of bhakti literature. Recent studies, based on extensive cross-cultural database of the International Study of Emotional Antecedents and Reactions, have shown that the modern stereotype according to which women are more emotional than men is actually pervasive across many cultures. It's not just in India. Emotions also, and that's also interesting for us, are seen as gender specific. There are rather male emotions like anger, contempt, or pride, and rather female happiness, sadness, embarrassment, fear, shame, and guilt. It should be noted that these studies never treat love as one emotion among others, because love they consider too complex to be treated as a singular entity. A modern study across 37 countries seems to confirm the widespread assumption that when it comes to emotion, women are considered more competent. They are better at understanding, articulating, and expressing emotions. An intuition that Indian culture seems to have always had. However, whether that element alone is sufficient to explain the preference for a female medium in the voicing of devotional feelings is altogether a different question. Perhaps the answer is hidden within a combination of factors related to the specificity of the female situation in India. Under the out of control of patriarchal rules and values, their presumed boundless emotionality is imagined to create a space for itself in their inner world. One of the common motifs throughout female-voiced Bhakti poetry is the almost unbearable tension of the constant effort to maintain social roles and social appearances while from the inside, inwardly, living completely absorbed in the immensity of a secret world of love. The specific discrepancy between inner and outer reality is perhaps what Bhakti poets would have found particularly appropriate for the expression of the otherwise ineffable. So here I move from Kabir to the experience of women sound poets, or the little that we know. Actually, these are just a few samples to give you a taste of it and to show you that they really, really deserve more attention. Getting back to the sound tradition, this is the context in which the rare, poorly documented and altogether feeble voices of women sound poets are to be appreciated. The extent to which they have identified with that sublimated femininity imposed by their male peers, or perhaps added new feature to the articulation of emotion, that has been my purpose. And I have yet, that research is not finished, far from that. Most of the women's sound poetry is still available only in manuscripts. A few compositions have been included in various printed anthologies. Some rare poets like Dayabai have been honored with their own printed booklets. And the one very helpful publication is that of Savitri Singh from 1953, Madhya Kalin Kavai Priyan. As little as we know about the biographies of medieval women saint poets, there seems to be a recurrent pattern which sets them somewhat apart from their male counterparts. They are usually attached, they typically belong to some religious community. So they are attached to a certain sampradaya, and also often they double as sister or sister cousins of the founder, and one of them actually, Bavali Sahiba, even founded her own community. And also they seem to come from wealthy or well-established households. Now Uma is one of such poets of whom we know practically nothing. Savitri Singh has discovered her in the research reports of the Nagari Pracharini Sabha, and she quotes a few compositions from a small unpublished manuscript kept there. The language is relatively simple with some Rajasthani features. the style is direct and unsophisticated, really close to the popular tradition. Actually, as I have to conclude, I will not read this one like you, but you have it, so you can appreciate it on your own. So this is in fact a part which is close in style and spirit to popular holy song, and thus it reminds of the countless padas that are included in the Varshots of Sangrah, that type of compilations, that type of anthologies. But here we have a sort of sanctified version of holy, and some of the elements are added as symbolic value. The 5 elements of the garden, the gulal that is disseminated is also assimilated to knowledge, is a metaphor for knowledge, and there is a sort of divine presence peeking behind the window that colors with the whole atmosphere. But in general, the women sound rarely speak in the first person. The Kabir speaks from the first person as a woman, but the female sant poets do not do that. And even sometimes they express the same cautiousness regarding the feminine gender that Kabir preaches. There is Savitri Singh quotes this line from Parvati, but she doesn't name her source. That translates as, don't put your faith in wealth and youth, and keep your spirit away from lustful women. Chit na rakhe kamini vas. The most conspicuous among the women's sons are Dayabai and Sahajobai, which are each credited with independent compilations, Dayabod and Sahaj Prakash. They were both disciples of Charandas and possibly his sisters or cousins. So you can appreciate some of their verses as with my imperfect translations. I will not read them. So these are just samples in any case. Women poets, it seems, from what I have seen so far, they seem to build on the same range of conventional images. They seem to have fully embraced the socially constructed version of their own gender. And as a whole, their compositions are more social than personal, more symbolic than authentic. And in any case, this can be said for sure, female sound poetry was not the inspiration behind male sound poetry on the same thing. So, as a result of all of this, paradoxically, as a woman, Kabir is poetically far more compelling. Although he works within the expectations of his audience with familiar images and established conventions, he ultimately transcends them. Beyond the personal or social aspects of the expression of womanhood, his female alter ego succeeds in tapping into a transpersonal emotion, a sort of sea of love flowing just beneath the surface of ordinary perception, which is, in fact, the emotional version or the emotional translation of the ultimate reality. And this is what he is best remembered for, of what the modern day oral tradition associated with him is a living testimony. Thank you.